we felt that we'd, in a sense, proved the approach through the work in schools and the work with young people who are out of schools, and there are many more things I could say about that. And my wife died, and my daughter had moved out because she was working. So I thought, well, I've got a house to myself, you know, and we could move towards 5 days a week, because we had parents who were wanting to make a choice about moving out of a school environment, and therefore they would need something longer, and something sort of some way towards a school but not being a school. So that was the decision we took, and it was my wife died in 2006, so it was the year after that we started in my house with 12 students and 2 what I would call learning assistants. I mean, people, learning advisor, just whatever label. And I had an office at the top of the garden, so I'd be around as well. We were quite oversubscribed. I mean, we could have had 24 if we'd had the space. And that was interesting because it was like from nothing, cold start. We didn't have any kind of, apart from the fact that we've been running these temporary groups, you know, and we've got the school experience, I suppose, which helped, I guess, with parents. And that was fine for 4 years, and then we decided to move on. We called ourselves South Downs Learning Centre because I liked the notion of a learning centre, and there was a local authority that was working towards having learning centres, and the notion, particularly post-16, that people could go to different classes in different institutions in the local authority, and so you would have a learning centre. I don't think that ever caught on, that schools would cease to call in schools and be learning centres, but it struck me as quite a progressive idea, you know, that you didn't, you know, that in a sense the person within that local authority then didn't sign up for a school. They just happened to perhaps have a base in one of the learning centres, but they could go to other ones to take classes, because again, as we know, especially post-16, they often limited options being given to young people because they think there's not enough people to form a class to do something specialist like A-level Greek or something. So I kind of like the concept of a learning centre, but eventually we changed our name because students said, well, the centre, it sounds like it's for the bad kids. It's like pupil referral unit was the alternative centre for education. So we took the label college, and then we dropped the South Downs bit and thought, well, we'll just say what we are, you know. That's the old cliche goes about, this is it, this is what's on the tin, you know, self-managed learning. So we'll be self-managed learning college, and then we moved to rent a floor at Brighton Youth Centre. That gave us me a chance to reclaim the house after 4 years, and then sell the house and move on. And it worked well, and I think a lot of parents quite like the idea of a house, a home. So the front room was a learning resource centre, the back room was for morning community meetings and general discussion. The kitchen was either for cooking or hanging out or art or science. And then we built a log cabin in the garden with an art room and a music room in it, so that then the kitchen was then more cookery stroke science place. And then there's an office at the top of the garden. And the garden, so people also, and then we had table and chairs on the deck outside, so some people could work out there as well. And then we used Preston Park for playing football, basketball, cricket, that kind of thing. And of course we'd used local resources, the library, a booth, museum and places like this, and we'd go on trips, so in a way we're always in the house anyway, because we'd go up to London to the Science Museum, or Victoria and Albert Museum, or whatever students wanted. So it worked pretty well, and then there was the opportunity to move and become Self-Managed Learning College, SML College, and continue to do some work in schools, which we have done. And of course, the company that I chair is still doing the work in organisations. And so that's still going on, the self-managed learning activity within companies. And that has allowed us to, the profits from the company to come into the college. And the college is part of an educational charity, which also is involved with research and publications and wider work with the organisations, so that often the organisations that we work with like to help the charity or be involved with things like seminars and workshops and things that charity runs. So it works quite well. We have a sister company that makes the profits, and then the charity that spends the money.
And can you talk a little bit about the kinds of students that you work with at SMLC, and what proportion of them are sort of referred to you from other schools or learning providers? What proportion of them are sort of essentially homeschooled type children who sort of want to see a slightly more structured approach to homeschooling?
Yeah.
And also about the funding model.
Yeah. So we take the complete variety of students, but when we worked in schools, often they have asked us to work with groups that they find a problem, and we keep trying to say, but we just like to have a nice mix. If we've got groups of 6, which is what we work with, wouldn't it be nice just to have a mix as opposed to people who've labelled in some way? But it's difficult to persuade schools of that, especially when they're paying for it or they've got money to pay for it anyway. But what's nice about running the Learning Centre now, the college, is that we have the spectrum. So the last group that I worked with in year 11, you had the spectrum from Sophie, who didn't do any GCSEs, through to Sam, who did 8 A stars and could have done 13 A stars, and he learned things he couldn't be bothered to sit for GCSE, like he taught himself Mandarin to quite a high level, but didn't bother to take it at GCSE. Well, but it would have probably been a higher level. So that's quite nice, and I think what is important for us is that we value each of those students just the same. That the person who gets no GCSEs is equal value to the person who gets a shed load of GCSEs at A star, and that it's not about the qualifications. It's about are we helping this person to go on at 16 to lead a good life, to be able to go to college and to do something that is meaningful to them, that they have chosen because they really want to do it, and that it's going to take them forward in their life. That's our objective. And the number of GCSEs can be an irrelevance in that respect, because I can remember one of the gifted and talented groups that we worked with. The girl I worried about most was the one who could learn anything. I mean, she was in year 10. She didn't really know what to choose to do at GCSE, because you couldn't do every GCSE because there are about 40 of them and something like that. And she didn't have a basis to make a choice because she could learn anything. And the rest of the group agreed that she could learn anything. And so she was the most stressed student. She was very able sporting as well. I mean, she wasn't just academic. I think she was county standard in badminton or something. But what she hadn't got was a kind of a passion for something. Whereas others in the group who would in a sense be labelled less able by the school because they weren't going to get A star in every subject. They were seen as gifted and talented, like they might be brilliant at maths but not going to do great at languages, for instance, but they'd be labelled gifted and talented. And she was the one I worried about most, the one that could do it. And I actually happened to read the local paper, and apparently English was her worst subject at GCSE, and she'd got a letter from the examining board after a GCSE. She thought, oh dear, I've done badly. And it was a letter to say she was in the top 5 marks for the whole of the UK for her, and English was her worst subject, and she dropped it for doing A level. it's like confirmed my worries. You know, I hope that she does get a passion for something that can give her a focus.
There's some really interesting questions that are thrown up. I remember you talking previously about, you know, there's an assumption in the education system that an A star is better than a C. But you have to work so much harder for an A star, and you were talking about how you've spoken to students who said, well, I only need a C, I only want a C, I don't want to go for an A star. And similarly, when you were talking about, you know, where do you want to be, and they say, we want to be rich, and you say, well, how rich? You know, like how much money do you actually want, and what's realistic and what's desirable? It just takes those broad ambitions of I want to achieve well and be rich and famous, and actually just makes those things really realistic and sort of turns them into pragmatic questions.
Yeah, I think it is important that the whole idea of the learning group is that it's a dialogue, so it's not just mechanistically doing the learning contract or learning agreement, whatever label we want to use. It is about a continuing dialogue. That's why the learning groups meet regularly. It's why the adult ones meet, you know, once a month, perhaps for 9 months. You know, that would be a fairly typical program. 9 months and meeting once, maybe every 5 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, and a whole day, because there's a continuing dialogue where people are checking things out, moving on in some places, areas, and not on others. I mean, the whole notion that learning is a nice, steady upward path is a nonsense, of course. You know, that people sometimes leap forward rapidly, and then other times they're struggling and not getting anywhere apparently, but that's rather important. And certainly in my own career, I've often talked about it being like crop rotation, that you need a fallow. So I've often chosen to go and do something that wasn't too demanding for a period of time, and then going back into something that was demanding. So like when I left the Polytechnic, I did a 2-year senior research fellow post in a business school where it allowed me a bit more freedom, and I was just researching and didn't have to do that. And then I went from that into being chief executive of a business school, you know, where it's full on 7 days a week, you know. And so I think that that this, you know, steady, you know, learning thing, and the notion of I mean, people by and large are quite good about thinking about their life once they're given some help to it. Where they struggle is often a way of achieving it, you know, but they can come out with the idea of I would like to be rich and famous, and then you can bin it down into how rich and how famous and what that might mean, and what that might mean in terms of a lifestyle. But I think it's often yes, helping the person to get real about it. The most interesting example was a girl in the Gifted and Talented group who was fantastic at learning different musical instruments, and she wanted to be an orchestra musician, she said. So we said, let's have a bit of research on what the life of an orchestra musician is like. We found it was that job satisfaction level was equivalent to prison officers. And the reason why is because if you're an orchestra musician, it's very insecure, it's peripatetic, you travel around, you're living out of a suitcase, you're not able to be creative, you have to do what the conductor wants. You're part of a group, you know, and you have to fit in. And so we were able to sort of present her with that and say, oh, is that the lifestyle you want? You know, so she would then have a basis on which to say, yes, so it isn't just about playing music, you know. If you're going to be in an orchestra, there is a lifestyle that goes with it that has implications, and are you okay with that? Or a girl who said, I want to act, you know, and we're going, well, what about plan B? I haven't got a plan B, I just want to act, you know. And so I said, well, at any one time, 85% of equity card holders are not acting, not doing what, you know. So they have to have a plan B whether they like it or not. I mean, they don't necessarily have a plan B, but they end up waiting tables or sweeping floors or whatever. So in the end, she did start to think about that, and actually now is in another career, you know. But she can probably do acting as well. But she's actually a manager, a store manager. So it's fine for people to have those dreams, but also to think them through. But also get into this habit of but you can change things, you know, that you can learn other things. The notion of a career is not I think schools and universities often imply it's just a simple ladder going up. Well, actually, the word career comes from the Latin carere, which is going round a track. And I think it's a verb, to career about. It's certainly been my experience. And when I think of people in my age range or even younger and about the jobs they're doing, none of them would have been the jobs that they thought they'd be doing when they were at school or university.
Yeah.
So it's about this ability to learn and change for yourself as you go through life. And the people I worry about most are the ones who haven't done that. There's a good piece of psychological research to show that people who don't explore in the teen years but have a very blinkered approach have more mental health problems in adult life, because they're often trapped into something they didn't want to do and they don't know how to get out of it. They don't have a confidence in being able to learn because they've never done it. They've gone along on a track, and they have been on a track like on a railway track, and when it goes over a cliff they just go over the cliff with it, and they don't know how to get off that, and that's dangerous in our culture. Jobs are, jobs that the government thinks are preparing people, STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, maths. Well, many of those jobs are ones that are totally susceptible to artificial intelligence taking over. The ones that aren't going to be taken over by AI and robots are in the creative sector, and that's the biggest growth of jobs in this country, is in the creative sector and in creative jobs in traditional organisations. Much bigger than in science, technology, engineering, etc. There are growth in those areas, but actually it's a global market which we're not very good at. Germans have always been better at manufacturing than us. Why do we even think that we can do it? An organisation like, say, Dyson is successful because they come up with ideas, but the stuff is made in China. It's not made here. The value added, the way you get the big box out of is coming up with the ideas. The creativity. That's what we're good as a nation, and also that is what is required. And for instance, the Chinese government is, we're sending out teachers to learn how to do things in China, and having Shanghai teachers coming here. The Chinese are worried about their lack of creativity and innovation, and that Chinese government realises they have to change and learn from us. We don't want to learn from them because that's disaster. The Chinese want to learn from us. They actually want to say, we're not going to be successful in continuing this growth rate that they've had and dealing with a global world unless they get to be more creative and innovative.